Welcome to lesson 4.7, all about local governments. In today's lesson, we're going to need to know about the structures of city government, the different levels and jobs of local governments, and finally, a little bit about the taxes that local governments levy. So in most states, the largest sub-unit of government, which would be the level of government that's just below being a state, would be a county. These counties can usually be responsible for a whole host of public services like police, and sometimes fire, sometimes schools, but in the state of Missouri, they're mostly responsible for zoning, commercial, and residential regulations. They sometimes, like in the case of St. Louis County, also provide public services, but that's not always the case. Below counties are another subdivision of government called cities. Cities or municipalities can sometimes be divided into different classes depending on how large they are. They have the same jobs as counties, so sometimes people will create cities because they want more specific rules about zoning and commercial and residential regulations. So for example, if an area wants to make sure that a particular place has very few, very dense buildings, they want to make sure everybody has kind of a suburban nature, then they might incorporate as a city so that they can prevent that kind of thing from being built in their neighborhoods. They also provide public services like fire, police, schools, sometimes things like that. Now in the state of Missouri, there are separate districts for schools. Now I said that cities and counties can run school districts, but in the state of Missouri, schools are always independent. In addition, there are fire districts in the state of Missouri. That's what you would use if your city doesn't provide a fire department for you. Finally, there are also districts for things like community colleges, zoos, museums, sewers. You could have a special taxing kind of district just responsible for local improvements. For example, there's a neighborhood in our area called the Central West End that has a special taxing district that's specifically to provide extra police protection for their area. So there's a whole host of other districts that are out there that are kind of different from cities that fulfill a little bit of a gap that cities in that area maybe aren't providing as much as the area's residents would want. Now, throughout the United States, generally cities are characterized as one of four structures. So the most common structure is actually the second one, council-manager, but we're going to explain the first one in just a second. Mayor-council systems have an elected city council that makes decisions and policies. And then there's a mayor who's also elected, who's separate from the city council, whose job it is to implement those jobs or those policies. Generally, mayor-council systems are either categorized as strong or weak. And strong mayor councils have a strong mayor, and weak ones have a weaker mayor. And that doesn't mean that it's a smear on the power, or rather on that mayor themselves. It talks about the power that that mayor has. So for example, in Clayton, he's a weak mayor in the sense that he doesn't control the day-to-day operations of most of the city's government. Clayton actually has the second type of government, which is called a council-manager system, where there's an elected city council that again makes policies. In the case of Clayton, we also have a mayor, and the role of the mayor is to also make policies along with the council. But they also have what's known as a city manager. Basically, they have a full-time employee of the council who reports directly to the council, and that's the person who runs the day-to-day operations of the city. That's the person who carries out those policies into effect. The third type of city government is known as a commission. And in this, it's similar to having a city council, but instead of having council members who are kind of elected and generally create policy, each member of the council is known as a commissioner, and they're responsible for one element of government. So you would elect a parks commissioner, and a police commissioner, and a fire commissioner, and they all together are responsible for the general forms of government. So some cities have this, not as many though as the first two. The final method, or the final way of structuring local governments, is actually the town meeting. And these are in very small towns in New England, but basically to make policies for the town, everybody comes together once a month and they stand up and they vote about it and they talk it out. So it's a little bit of that direct democracy idea. So generally in the United States, we would say most local city governments are either mayor-council or council-manager, and sometimes those council managers also have a mayor who's really a pretty weak mayor in terms of their ability to carry out day-to-day operations. So our final topic is the taxes and local government issue. Most local governments are funded through really three things: income taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes. And in the state of Missouri, the vast majority of local governments rely on property taxes, followed by sales taxes. And only 2 local governments in the entire state out of the thousands of governments actually use an income tax. That's the city of St. Louis and Kansas City. The vast majority, like I said, use property taxes. Because of that reliance on property taxes, cities have to focus on creating growth, either new residences, new businesses, and things like that, in order to continue to pay for city services. And thinking about it this way, as roads age and as maintenance is needed, a lot of times they need to raise more tax money to maintain things that are already built. So cities sometimes decide to redevelop areas or encourage growth by providing tax breaks. So they can create things like TIFs, which are tax increment financing, which is a way of taking an increment or a part of the taxes and redirecting it back to the property developer, to a private company. You can also just give someone a straight up property abatement, which is just saying a property tax break. I'm going to cut you a break on how much taxes you have to pay. There's property credits for redeveloping historic properties, so if you reinvest and rehab a building, or if you provide low-income housing, you can get tax credits for those things too. But that sometimes is a race to the bottom for some cities because there's a competitive aspect that begins to take over. So hopefully you've taken good notes. Here's your objectives, and we'll see you next time.